The Zorkai watched from their orbiting ships, towering figures cloaked in arrogance. Their sneering laughter echoed through the vastness of space, filling their communication channels as they observed humanity's feeble attempts at defense. Earth's military, scrambling with missiles and fighter jets, was nothing more than a spectacle, a joke. Their conquest was underway, and Earth was just the latest in a long line of subjugated worlds. Primitive. Pathetic. One of the commanders chuckled, his voice dripping with condescension as they observed the futile human defenses on their displays. They had seen this many times before. The Zorkai Empire had spread across the galaxy, conquering weaker species with ease. Humanity would be no different. Humanity's conventional weapons barely scratched the surface of the Zorkai warships. The alien soldiers stood on the ground, easily brushing aside what Earth considered its finest warriors. Plasma shields deflected gunfire effortlessly. In the air, Zorkai fighter drones outmaneuvered every jet, rendering Earth's air forces almost laughably obsolete. Even Earth's most advanced tanks were reduced to molten scrap metal with little more than a flicker of the aliens' energy weapons. The Zorkai had conquered other worlds with their overwhelming technology and unyielding might, enslaving entire species and imposing their will upon the galaxy. To them, humanity's struggle was no different than stepping on insects. But unknown to the Zorkai, humanity was already preparing to strike back in a way they could not foresee. Special Recon, an elite and secretive force formed for this very purpose, was already moving in the shadows. Humanity's leadership had long suspected that an extraterrestrial invasion might one day occur. Years of clandestine operations had culminated in the formation of Special Recon, highly trained, equipped with advanced stealth technology, and dedicated to sabotage behind enemy lines. Special Recon wasn't about brute force or conventional warfare. They specialized in stealth, sabotage, and misdirection. Their job wasn't to meet the enemy head-on but to infiltrate and destroy from within. The Zorkai's arrogance had made them overconfident, and this would be their fatal flaw. They believed their homeworld was untouchable, protected by automated systems and unparalleled defenses. They couldn't fathom that a mere human force would have the audacity, or the capability, to infiltrate it. Earth's leaders watched in silence as cities were attacked, but behind the scenes, orders were quietly given. The Special Recon commander received the signal, a green light to initiate the most audacious mission in human history. He and his team had prepared for this day for years, training in the harshest conditions, their minds sharp and their bodies conditioned for battle on any planet. Now, their moment had arrived. They moved swiftly and silently. As the Zorkai mockingly paraded their superiority, Special Recon was already mobilizing. Cloaked ships, undetectable to even the most advanced Zorkai sensors, lifted off from secret locations on Earth. Their destination, the Zorkai Homeworld. Their mission, sabotage the alien infrastructure and cripple the Zorkai where they least expected it. No fanfare accompanied Special Recon's launch. No speeches. No dramatic proclamations. The team knew their task and had accepted the likely reality that they might never return. They didn't need glory. They needed victory. The Zorkai, entrenched in their beliefs of superiority, continued their assault on Earth. Ground forces advanced, toppling human resistance in city after city. It was a massacre. Their technology was unstoppable, and humanity's defenses crumbled. But all of this was a distraction. The real battle wasn't happening on Earth. It was happening light years away, in the silent void of space, where Special Recon moved undetected toward the heart of the Zorkai Empire. As the days passed, Earth's leaders held their breath. They knew their forces couldn't hold out much longer. They had staked everything on Special Recon, hoping the team could deliver the blow necessary to turn the tide. There was no other option. The Zorkai continued their mockery, unaware that the reckoning was already en route. Their broadcast showed Earth's cities burning, their soldiers boasting of an easy victory. They even transmitted images back to their homeworld, where the Zorkai leadership watched with smug satisfaction. They believed they were witnessing the inevitable fall of another weak species. But the Zorkai underestimated the resilience of humanity and the cunning of those who operated in the shadows. The Special Recon Team's ship slipped through the blackness of space, cloaked by technology that made it nearly invisible to even the most advanced alien sensors. Silence reigned within the ship, each member focused on their role. There were no unnecessary words, no distractions. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. They had trained for this moment for years. Now it was happening. As the Zorkai's homeworld came into view, the team steeled themselves. The planet was a sprawling industrial machine. Towering spires of metal and concrete stretched endlessly toward the sky. Enormous automated factories churned day and night, producing weapons, ships, and the very tools of destruction that had laid waste to countless worlds. Surveillance drones patrolled the skies in tight patterns, and massive energy fields protected key structures. The Zorkai had spared no expense in securing their home. But they hadn't accounted for the human element, the unpredictability that no amount of automation could ever fully anticipate. Special Recon touched down far from any of the central hubs, in a barren, wasteland-like region dominated by sprawling factories. The harsh environment was a byproduct of centuries of unchecked industry, and the atmosphere was thick with pollution. Even here, far from the centers of power, surveillance was tight. The team moved in silence, their cloaking systems blending them into the industrial landscape. There could be no mistakes. One wrong move, one small error, and the mission would fail before it even began. They approached their first target, a power station that controlled a significant portion of the planet's energy grid. The Zorkai had automated much of their infrastructure, relying on artificial intelligence and drones to oversee their systems. This was their first weakness. While their technology was advanced, their overconfidence in it had left them vulnerable. The team moved swiftly, bypassing security measures and planting charges at key points in the facility. Within minutes they were gone, ghosts in the night, leaving no trace of their presence. The station would go offline at the exact moment needed to disrupt the Zorkai's command structure. The deeper the team moved into the heart of the Zorkai Empire, the more they saw the alien species' arrogance reflected in their infrastructure. Huge skyscrapers stood as symbols of their dominance, filled with technology far beyond what humans had achieved. But there was a hollowness to it all. Everything was controlled by machines. The Zorkai had distanced themselves from manual labor and physical combat, relying almost entirely on automation to maintain their empire. It was this very reliance that would be their undoing. As Special Recon moved closer to the Zorkai's central command hub, they encountered the first signs of life beyond the automated systems. Other alien species, enslaved by the Zorkai, labored in factories and under harsh conditions. These aliens had long since given up hope of ever seeing freedom, broken by years of oppression. The Zorkai believed them too weak to rise, too beaten down to pose any threat. But when the humans approached these enslaved workers, the spark of rebellion began to ignite. The Special Recon Team spoke with the alien laborers, explaining their mission. They revealed their plans to cripple the Zorkai infrastructure and offered the enslaved species a chance at freedom. At first, the workers were skeptical, their trust eroded by decades of cruelty and exploitation. But as the humans shared their strategy, the glimmer of hope slowly returned. This was their opportunity, a chance to rise against their oppressors. Special Recon would provide the chaos, and the enslaved species would strike from within. The team moved on, deeper into Zorkai territory, spreading their plan as they went. Each sabotage was timed with precision. Power grids were disabled, communication networks disrupted, and security systems slowly eroded. The Zorkai, too secure in their belief of invincibility, were slow to realize what was happening. Their systems began to falter, but they attributed the malfunctions to technical issues rather than sabotage. After all, who could possibly breach their homeworld? Who would dare? As the team neared their final objective, the enslaved species began to prepare for rebellion. Armed with weapons scavenged from the factories and emboldened by the humans' presence, they waited for the signal. Special Recon had orchestrated everything, timing the power outages and communication failures with pinpoint accuracy. When the signal came, it would be swift. The Zorkai would be blindsided by an attack from within. The team reached their last target, the command hub itself. This was where the Zorkai leaders controlled their forces, monitored their empire, and coordinated their military. It was heavily fortified, with layers of defenses that would have stopped any conventional assault. But Special Recon wasn't here for a frontal attack. They were here to exploit the very systems the Zorkai trusted most. While the Zorkai sat in their command center, utterly oblivious to the threat, the team infiltrated their systems, planting the final set of charges and hacking into key networks. The sabotage was complete. Now all that remained was to wait for the final strike. The Zorkai, still mocking the idea that anyone could challenge their power, continued to monitor Earth's destruction, unaware that the true battle was already happening on their doorstep. Special Recon's mission was almost complete, and soon, the Zorkai would realize that their homeworld, the center of their empire, was about to crumble beneath them. The signal was given, and across the Zorkai homeworld, chaos began to unfold. Systems that had once operated flawlessly now failed one after another. Factories ground to a halt, their machines silent for the first time in centuries. Power grids flickered and died, plunging entire districts into darkness. Communication networks went offline, leaving Zorkai leaders isolated from their military forces. What had once been an orderly, highly efficient world was now descending into confusion. For the first time in their history, the Zorkai were not in control. And the enslaved species, long oppressed and beaten down, were ready. The workers who had been forced into grueling labor began to rise. What had started as murmurs of rebellion quickly spread like wildfire. Weapons, once carefully hidden, were brought out. The Zorkai, still reeling from the sudden failures of their infrastructure, were caught completely off guard by the uprising. They had never imagined the species they had enslaved would dare to fight back, much less organize so effectively. The initial skirmishes were swift and brutal. Zorkai patrols, accustomed to complacency, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of those they had subjugated. In factory after factory, the enslaved workers fought back, targeting weak points in the Zorkai defense systems, many of which had already been sabotaged by Special Recon. The Zorkai, who had relied so heavily on their automated systems, were unprepared for combat on the ground. They had always fought from a distance, using their advanced technology to wipe out enemies before they even had a chance to fight. But now, they were forced into direct combat, and their arrogance had left them unprepared for such a scenario. The rebellion spread rapidly, and Special Recon, watching from the shadows, knew that their plan was working. The Zorkai forces were stretched thin, trying to contain the uprising, but the damage had already been done. They had lost control of key infrastructure, their communication systems were in disarray, and their power grids were failing. The very empire they had spent centuries building was crumbling, and it had all happened in a matter of hours. Special Recon didn't remain idle during the uprising. While the enslaved species fought the Zorkai on the ground, the team continued to execute precision strikes on key targets. They took out command centers, destroyed weapons caches, and eliminated Zorkai leaders who were attempting to rally their forces. Each move was calculated, designed to keep the Zorkai off balance and ensure they couldn't regain control. The Zorkai's automated defenses, once impenetrable, were useless against the human team's stealth and guerrilla tactics. As the rebellion intensified, the Zorkai leaders grew desperate. They sent out emergency signals, trying to call in reinforcements from their fleets scattered across the galaxy. But Special Recon had anticipated this. The communication jammers they had placed throughout the planet prevented any messages from leaving the atmosphere. The Zorkai were trapped, cut off from the rest of their empire. And even if they could get a message through, it was doubtful any help would come in time. The once mighty Zorkai were now facing a battle for survival on their own homeworld, and they were losing. Throughout the chaos, Special Recon maintained a strategic advantage. Their small numbers and superior tactics allowed them to strike and disappear before the Zorkai could mount any effective counterattack. They moved like phantoms, always one step ahead, always hitting the Zorkai where it hurt the most. The Zorkai, for all their technological superiority, had never faced an enemy like this. They were used to overwhelming their foes with raw power, but Special Recon wasn't playing by those rules. Humanity had found a way to turn the tide, and now the Zorkai were paying the price for their arrogance. On the ground, the enslaved species were finally tasting freedom. Factories that had once produced weapons of war were now being turned into fortresses by the workers who had built them. The Zorkai, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, found themselves on the defensive. The slaves they had once treated as little more than tools were now their greatest threat. And with Special Recon continuing to cripple their infrastructure, the Zorkai had no way to regain control. As night fell on the Zorkai homeworld, the situation grew more dire for the alien overlords. Fires burned across the landscape, the glow of rebellion lighting up the horizon. The Zorkai military, once thought to be invincible, was now fragmented and leaderless. Their command centers had been destroyed, their communication networks were offline, and their automated defenses had been turned against them. The very systems they had relied on to control the galaxy were now their downfall. Special Recon knew the final phase of the mission was close. The rebellion was spreading, and the Zorkai were on the verge of collapse. But there was one last target that needed to be dealt with: the Zorkai leadership itself. The team had saved this for last, knowing that once the leadership was eliminated, the Empire would fall. They had already infiltrated the command hub, planting charges and setting up their final strike. The Zorkai, still clinging to the belief that they were unbeatable, had no idea how close they were to total defeat. They believed their reinforcements would arrive any minute, that they would soon regain control and crush the uprising. But Special Recon knew better. They had already ensured that no help was coming. The Zorkai were on their own, and their time was running out. As the uprising reached its peak, and the Zorkai forces continued to crumble, Special Recon prepared for the final blow. They had come this far, and now, victory was within reach. The Zorkai leadership sat in their command center, still refusing to believe that the situation had spiraled out of control. For too long, their superiority had gone unchallenged, and now, even as their empire crumbled around them, they clung to the belief that this was a temporary setback. Their homeworld, the heart of their power, had never been breached. They believed that once they regained communications with their fleets, order would be restored. But they were wrong. The Special Recon team was already deep inside the command hub, moving with precision. They had bypassed the remaining defenses and reached the inner sanctum where the Zorkai leaders remained, oblivious to how close their defeat truly was. These leaders, the architects of countless atrocities across the galaxy, still looked down on humanity as little more than a pest, unaware that humanity's finest had already outmaneuvered them at every turn. The team planted the final set of charges, each one carefully placed to bring the entire structure down. But before they could leave, they intercepted a transmission, one last desperate attempt by the Zorkai to call for reinforcements. The alien leaders, still in denial, were trying to rally their fleets, unaware that their communications were being jammed, their calls for help going nowhere. Special Recon listened in silence, waiting for the right moment. And then it came. A slight tremor ran through the building as the charges at key infrastructure points went off, cutting power to the central command. In an instant, the alien leaders were thrown into chaos. Screens blinked out, alarms blared, and confusion swept through the command center. They scrambled to restore control, barking orders at their underlings, but it was too late. The final stage of Special Recon's plan had been set in motion. As the command hub descended into disarray, the team moved swiftly to their exit. The rebellion outside had reached its peak, with the enslaved species now fully in control of key zones across the planet. Zorkai forces, leaderless and disorganized, were retreating or surrendering, unable to regroup. The once mighty empire was unraveling, and the alien leaders, for the first time in their long reign, began to feel fear. Special Recon detonated the final charges, and the command hub collapsed in on itself, the shockwave reverberating through the city. The Zorkai leadership, so confident in their invulnerability, were now either dead or trapped beneath the rubble. With their fall, the last vestiges of Zorkai control evaporated. Their forces, scattered and without direction, were unable to mount any further resistance. The uprising, which had started as a whisper, now roared to its conclusion. The enslaved species, finally free, poured into the streets, reclaiming their world. Factories once used to build weapons of war were now being repurposed for rebuilding. The Zorkai, so used to seeing themselves as rulers, were now being hunted by those they had once oppressed. Their time had come to an end. For humanity, this was a moment of triumph. The Zorkai had mocked them, underestimated them, and paid the price for their arrogance. Special Recon had not only dismantled their empire but also proved that humanity, once seen as insignificant, was a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would no longer view Earth as a backwater planet populated by a weak species. Humanity had taken its first major step into the greater cosmic stage, and they had done it on their own terms. As the dust settled, the remaining Zorkai survivors, those who had escaped the destruction of the command hub, were left in hiding, scattered across their own ruined world. Their fleets, still unaware of the disaster unfolding on their homeworld, were aimlessly drifting through space, waiting for orders that would never come. The Zorkai Empire, which had once stretched across the galaxy, had been crippled in a matter of days by a force they had never seen coming. Special Recon had done what many thought was impossible. They had taken on an enemy far superior in every way, technologically, militarily, and had won not through brute force, but through strategy, precision, and the ability to exploit their enemy's arrogance. Their mission was over, but the consequences of their actions would echo across the galaxy for years to come. As the team regrouped, preparing to make their return to Earth, they knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had risen, and though they had won this battle, there would be many more to come. But now, the galaxy knew one thing for certain: humanity was not to be underestimated. They had crushed an empire at its core and emerged victorious, against all odds. The Zorkai had mocked humanity, believing them weak and insignificant. But in the end, it was humanity's will, their ingenuity, and their refusal to be crushed that had turned the tables. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson, one that would never be forgotten. Special Recon had set the stage for a new era, one where humanity would stand tall among the stars. The mission complete, the team watched as the Zorkai homeworld burned in the distance. This was the end of the Zorkai, but for humanity, it was the dawn of something greater.